All right, let's do it. So I'm going to open Logic from the desktop. If you have a project open, then I'm pretty sure Logic will just open your file, whatever you were working on before. This is what it should look like pretty much for everyone when you first open the program. It's going to give you these options: empty projects, live loops. Go to your recent projects, one that you've been working on. Shout out to Sleep Token there. Tutorials, they actually give you quite a bit of content to work with, so shout out to Logic team. Development's great. You have project templates, which we'll definitely get into in a later section, but I'm just going to start with a new project, empty project. Works for me. It's going to prompt you to create a track, and basically a track is one element of your production, your file, excuse me. It can be anything within these options. Software instrument is going to be a virtual instrument, basically, that you have parameters that you can play around with. That's where you get most of your writing done, your composing. It's within the software instruments with a keyboard that you can use with your keyboard or with an external MIDI instrument. Next is going to be audio track. Audio track basically takes input from an audio interface, which is an external device that you have to plug into your computer, usually via USB. For me, it's default to the Universal Audio Thunderbolt. That's what I'm using to capture my voice right now. It's what I'm using to capture some other stuff in the room. Drummer track is going to be basically Logic generating a drum file for you based on parameters that we'll open and play around with eventually. External MIDI, I don't use this too much, but if you have some instruments or synthesizers or whatever have you that uses that protocol, then feel free to open those. And guitar and bass, which is basically the same as an audio track, but it defaults to whatever input you're using as your DI or direct input, whatever your guitar is plugged into basically. Usually it's an audio interface at the end of the day, or you can mic a cab, up to you. But again, you get audio input and output options for those. So let's just go to a software instrument for our first track. So this is what Logic has opened for us for the software instrument that I just opened. It's basically going to give you the library of all the Logic sounds if you have them downloaded on the left hand side. Inspector window, which is basically how you make manipulations to how you modify the track that you have currently selected. And then it has your main kind of editing window, which you'll spend a lot of time. The classic electric piano with this keyboard is the one that it opened for me. And if you want to pop open the keyboard and close it again, it's Command K. I'm going to be going through a lot of hotkeys. And I move very fast. So I actually have a link for all of the hotkeys that I'm using, which I'll provide in the comment section. But it's a very good way to kind of navigate the program, and once you get familiar enough, you could get really fast with it. So that's kind of the main window here that you'll see. I'll go over the toolbar, which is up here. This quick help button, extremely useful. I would basically have it on at all times. Whenever you hover over a region, it'll tell you some information about what you're actually modifying up in here, this little corner. Again, very useful if you're first learning, just to develop the terminology and see how the program actually operates. So I'm going to close all three of these, so we're in our main track window. I'm going to go over the toolbar next. Basically, from left to right, this is the smart controls. So once you have a track selected, you press B, very good keystroke to know. It has basically a couple different parameters that Logic has baked into this track for you. This is the treble and the bass, the drive of the electric piano. These are some other modifications you can make. You can also pop over to EQ. That'll be basically your frequency spectrum. It's kind of like an analyzer and a manager for all of your frequencies within the selected track. You have low cut, shelf, we'll get into the EQ later, but B is how you open this back and forth. Next one's going to be your mix window, which brings up basically a longer view, a more compressed version of all of your tracks. This is the inspector window basically. This is called your channel strip. For each track has a channel strip, and the inspector window, if you wanted to open that, has the same content in it. But once you have that track selected, you'll be able to modify parameters within that track. And then this one is your MIDI window, or basically the notes that you've played, you'll be able to modify within this window. If you hold Command here, that's your pencil tool, you'll be able to actually write in notes. You could go crazy here, definitely. I'm not going to do that right now. We'll go into that in a later section. I'm going to close that window. E is how to get that open and close it. X is to open the mixer window. Logic's very good about kind of assigning keystrokes to associations with what they're called. So X, mixer. E, edit, they're good about that. R, record. Command K, that's your keyboard. I'm throwing very friendly reminders out here because they're very important to develop your workflow and kind of work fast within the program. So moving along, this is your transport. So R is record. If you have a count in over here, it'll give you a measure in advance before you start recording. You can turn that off if you'd like. Record. You can bring up your keyboard, play some notes. It's going to basically transpose whatever you wrote into the MIDI window at a given velocity, which is basically how hard you hit the keyboard. Now, I just have a Mac keyboard hooked up, and it's going to be the same velocity every time, which you can actually edit by going in here. It's C and V, how hard you hit the notes, basically. But again, we're not going to play around too much in the MIDI window, but for now. Back to the transport controls. If I wanted to go back to the beginning of the track, I just hit enter. Play, obviously, space bar. That's good to know. And then the cycle. So the cycle is basically the part of your section that's looping. And how you activate those up here on the playhead. This is actually the playhead of which measure and beat it's playing from when you press the space bar while the loop is not active. So if I press here and I press space, it's going to play. Same thing here. Enter will play from the beginning of the track. If you have the loop active, it's only going to loop within that section. And if you press spacebar again, it's going to start from there every single time. So C for cycle to turn that on and off. Depending on which section of the song you're working on, you want the cycle window active so you could basically loop that section and hear it back while you're making adjustments and changes. These are all the project settings. They are specific to each project that you open. So the tempo is how fast it's going. If you ask me, 70 to 140 is basically the tempos that you'll be working within. Anything over 140, you just cut it in half and it's 70 or whatever. And if it's below 70, just multiply it by 2. I'm going to get a lot of fire for that. But basically, between 70 and 140 usually is how project tempos, that's where they live. And depending on the genre you're working in, the tempo can have a big effect on kind of the style that you're trying to emulate. Your time signature will actually break up all of your measures into specific increments. So if I wanted to start 3/4 at 5, I'd go to the 5 in the playhead. I'd change my time signature to 3/4. It's going to ask me if I want to change the project signature or insert a new one. I'm going to insert a new one. So after 5, it changes to 3/4. Maybe at 9, I want to change it back. So I go to 9, change to 4/4, and we're back. So when it comes to composing and songwriting and all of that, having access to those tools is pretty important. This is your key signature. It defaults to C major because everybody loves C major, but you have all these options to choose from. This is pretty important when you transfer your project file over to another person. You want to have them basically know what key you're writing in and all of that. So there's that. Here's another kind of in-depth option for you to customize your toolbar. We will get into that, don't worry. These I don't find myself using much. It's a couple other logic functions that they have baked into the program. We'll get into solo and mute and whatnot. Again, this is your count in. If you're recording, it'll actually start a measure early for you. And then this is your metronome. Metronome being K, K for click. You'll get used to it. And then this is your overall master volume, what's actually coming out of your speakers. Usually you want to keep that at unity, which is 0. Excuse me. So next, we have over here on the right side the notepad, which I do find myself using. You can add notes about certain files and projects, or files and clips, and if you want to make some changes in the future, but you're caught up doing something now, like you could leave a note for yourself in the file, and that will actually transfer when you send it to another person too. And then here are the Apple loops, and these are great. This is a massive, massive sound bank of basically different audio files and stuff, MIDI files that you could use. They give you pretty good song starters here. There's pianos, drums, anything you want really, and it breaks it down actually into the tempo and the key, so you could, keep your file all in the same key, which is nice, important. And then here's your browser window. So any active files that you have here, you'll be able to access from here. And you can actually sort through your entire, computer's file system to drag and drop, upload files. If you have stems from another person, you could go into this window, drag them in. We'll go on to this too much later, but the project files, basically, once you have a good sense of like naming them, organizing them, this is a very useful window to drag and drop. So that's most of the navigation. This is the snapping, which I would keep on basically. If you're moving an audio file or something, you want to be able to snap it to the timeline so that everything stays in time. Let me just cover this window too. So edit, function, and view are all three of those are meant to modify a selected file. So if you have a file selected and you want to make a change, you'll go into these windows. This is the loops, or excuse me, this is the loop editor. Yeah, the loop grid. I don't find myself using this as much, clearly, but it's a different kind of approach to building out song structure and assigning loops to certain measures, and then that's how you kind of build out a song, is from these little building blocks. So it's very useful. Again, I don't find myself much using it. This is automation, which is A. We'll get into that later. I'm just kind of briefing. And then flex, which is Command F. Again, much later. This is playback follows insertion, which is basically a fancy way of saying if I get to the end of my playhead here and this is on, it's going to snap to the next measure, basically, or the next section. So it'll always follow the playhead. You could toggle that on and off with, I think, tilde is what it's called. It's the key above tab. Yeah, I usually keep it on. Pointer tool is going to be your main tool. This is your primary tool. If you're just using the mouse, you're going to be using the pointer tool for the most part. I rarely change this to another tool. The secondary tool is all of these other options, which are meant to modify different parameters in your project. If I hold Command and you see my pointer actually turns to this marquee tool, is what it's currently selected as. You change that to fade, hold Command, now it's going to be the fade tool. I don't have any files to play with, so that's not a good example, but pencil tool, scissors tool, we'll go all over these, don't you worry. And then this is your horizontal and vertical zoom. Vertical zoom is how large vertically the tracks that you're viewing are. Horizontal zoom is to give you kind of more space in the project to work left to right. If you hold Option, there's your zoom thing that goes up. You can actually select a given portion of your file or tracks using, and once you let go, it shows you what you just selected on the horizontal auto zoom. Pretty useful stuff. And then if you hold Option and basically take the mouse and go left to right or up and down, it'll also zoom in and out of whatever portions you want to be modifying. So all very useful tools, and I think that's what I want to cover for this section.